Well, it wasn't rehearsed. It was completely spontaneous, so I think I spoke of something that was already within me. And it just dawned on me that learning is not something that exists outside of myself. It's such a basic tool of survival, and as human beings, as a species, we're actually quite good at it. Often, human beings aren't aware just how great they are at coping. If you look at the wristwatch, for example, it was really the pocket watch, but then people were driving cars and flying planes, and they had to come up with a way. How can you tell time? So, you know, learning was very natural. They tied the pocket watch around their wrist. Or if you look at coat racks, people used to hang their coats on doorknobs. So the first coat racks was, you know, 10 doorknobs on the wall. So people aren't aware how natural it is for them to learn and to come up with new strategies. So what I'm leaning towards is that learning is not something outside of ourselves that we need to strive and reach for, but it's something that's already within us. And if we could just be more aware of how endemic and natural it is to our own natural rhythm, we might be inclined to embrace it more on a day-to-day basis. In fact, every human being is constantly learning every day, even if they're not aware. We're constantly refining the decisions we make based on the experiences we had the day before. I'm looking at learning from a fresh paradigm as not something outside of myself, but something I carry with me every day, and that's going to make me more responsive to learn even well. So I might say that learning is natural. First, I want to say that being a lifelong learner is very infectious, and once you begin, it's really hard to stop, and you build momentum. So it's easier than people think. The most difficult part is just getting started, and once you do that, you'll find your own momentum building up. The reason why it's imperative for survival to be a lifelong learner is if you look at the SWOT analysis of an individual, they have their strengths and weaknesses, but the threats and opportunities are the externalities of the world. Those are constantly changing. Let's look at the strategy of staying balanced on a seesaw. You're on a seesaw and someone keeps shaking it. Your strategy is to stay in that seesaw. So you're going to shift left, you're going to shift right. Being a lifelong learner and constantly picking up new skills is analogous to shifting your weight to the left and to the right as someone is rocking that seesaw, so you stay on the seesaw. So the only thing that is guaranteed is constant change, and we have to constantly shift our weight, picking up new skills to make sure that we don't stay off the seesaw. So even as a professor, what I teach today is different from what I taught a year ago in the same course. So I tell my students that I'm constantly adjusting and rebalancing my own curriculum based on what happened in the past 12 months. So in order to keep up with the changes in the externalities, you need to pick up new skills. But I want to emphasize it's infectious, it's enjoyable, and it's a positive thing. Too often people approach learning in the sense that, oh no, I have to learn more. And they see it as the same reason why we shut off an alarm clock, to avoid a negative. But you have to adjust your mindset and really understand that it does become infectious. And then you get to the point where if you really want to learn something, teach someone else. In fact, that's how I've done my most learning. Being in a position where I have the privilege of teaching students, I actually learn even more. And people need to understand that by teaching other people, they're going to learn even more. I tell my students that you should read things that you have quote-unquote no business reading, because that's where innovation comes from, where you take something from one discipline and you take it across another discipline. So recently I was reading philosophy, deconstructivism, and the idea that just by building four walls, for example, just by building a home, right, you're building, but by the very nature of building something, you're excluding things. You're excluding things that you're not including in your four walls. And what you exclude, ultimately, will not be denied. Okay, this is a philosophy that I was reading, nothing to do with business. But I say if something is true and it can be dragged from one discipline to another, that's called wisdom. So when I read how by virtue of building something, you're also excluding things, that's a perspective that I never embraced before. I would always say, I'm building something. I never acknowledge that I'm excluding the things that I do not include in the thing that I built. And this philosophy says, but what you exclude will not be denied. So I recently took that to the space of business, and I'm now looking at the law of unintended consequences. And I'm now looking at anytime you build a business system, if you want to be truly holistic, now I've learned that I have to acknowledge the things that I'm not including, and now I have to try to see in the future, which is very difficult because many business leaders cannot even predict the present. So it's even more difficult to predict the future. But by merely acknowledging the things that I'm excluding and realizing that these things will not be denied, it forces me to ask the question, what are some of the unintended consequences of these things I'm excluding, and how might they holistically impact both positively and negatively the system that I'm building? So that's what I learned in the past few days.
Hi, I'm Russell Sarder, Chairman and CEO of Netcom Learning. Netcom Learning's purpose is to promote the values of lifelong learning. The moment we think we know it all, we stop growing. Develop the passion for learning, be a lifelong learner.